1st Night Fighter Unit. Night Fighter Group 1 came into being on July the 20th, 1940, shortly before Oberst Kammhuber's new Night Fighter Division, which operated under Kesselring's Luftflotte II. By the end of 1940, 3 separate Night Fighter groups had been established, all with a nominal strength of 200 aircraft, although the number available for operations was nearer 100. The majority was situated around major cities and the Ruhr industrial area. Others were sited to cover the Eastern Front and areas such as the Ploesti oil fields. The Wilde Sau, or wild boar tactic, was the idea of Major Hans-Joachim Hermann. He suggested the use of ordinary day fighters such as the Me-109 and FW-190 in the night fighter role, and after trials this was introduced under the newly created JG-300 commanded by Hermann. The tactic was simple and would become a main feature of Germany's defensive battles in the latter stages of the war. The principle was similar to the Himmelbett system, in that use would be made of the searchlights in illuminating the enemy bomber formations. The planes under Hermann's control would then fly high above the bombers and attack at will, using visual identification methods only. This unit's success would see the formation of new wild boar units, and also an entire new fighter division that would have Hi-O Hermann at its head. This tactic was not always popular, however. Pilots were not trained for this type of operation, and single-engine fighters were not ideally suited to night fighting. Vernachtjagd, or long-range night fighting, was designed to take the fight to the enemy when they were at their most vulnerable, aiming to catch them when they were taking off at the start of their operations or to intercept them during their outward journey. Sometimes they would try to ambush them on the return journey to their home bases. The strategy had varying success and was never mounted on the scale of the night fighter attacks over the continent. It was difficult for the officials to confirm kills by the night fighters, and operations were officially suspended towards the end of 1941. The pilots, however, did continue to stage this type of operation and inflicted losses upon the Allied bomber crews. Mitschwimment, or swimming with the flow, was a tactic used in response to the Allied bombers' increased numbers and condensed formations. The Luftwaffe fighters would fly into the stream of Allied bombers and travel with the formation. They would then pick off targets at will until they had expended their ammunition. In a role reversal of an unexpected kind, night fighters were used in conventional daylight raids or daylight sorties. Like the wild boar pilots, the night fighter pilots were being asked to fight in alien conditions, and the twin-engine planes were too slow to be fully effective during the day. Tactics that were deadly during the nighttime hours were almost suicidal when employed during the day, for lone fighters were easy targets for the heavily armed bombers. Daylight sorties were yet another attempt to counter the threat from Allied bomber formations, which would result in further losses for the Luftwaffe, losses that they could ill afford. The opening phases of the bombing offensive of World War II can be described as a policy of wait and see, for there are grave moral implications placed upon a country that decides to attack non-military targets belonging to the enemy. Britain and America had been developing their bomber forces in the years leading up to World War II, and were both of the firm conviction that if war broke out, the enemy would be capable of delivering a knockout blow from the air that would prevent any further prosecution of the war. The belief in the knockout blow theory meant that great efforts were made to produce an effective countermeasure. In the years leading up to 1939, Britain made huge advances in the development of early warning radar and a force of fast interceptor fighter planes. Priority was given to the development of fighters over bombers, and although this policy was unpopular in some circles, the benefits would soon become apparent. Hitler had stated that the Royal Air Force must be defeated before an invasion of England could begin. And during the summer months of 1940, the Royal Air Force and the Luftwaffe battled for control of the skies over southern England. Luftwaffe bombers attacked military targets such as airfields and radar stations, but difficulties were becoming apparent even at this early stage of the war. The fact was that accurate bombing of a target, even in daylight, was extremely hard. What was more, targets were not attacked often enough to render them permanently unusable. As the total defeat of the RAF became an unrealistic aim for the Luftwaffe, they switched tactics to concentrate on the bombing of London and other non-military targets. Even here, shortcomings were apparent, for the two-engine bombers lacked the range and load-carrying capabilities to deliver the decisive victory needed. Germany's inability to develop a long-range, four-engine bomber was proving extremely costly. While the bombs dropped on Britain's cities and ports, the Allies were making their own plans to take the air war to Germany. The bombing offensive over the Reich was begun by Britain's Royal Air Force, and in particular, Bomber Command. This force was built up slowly from 1936, and by the outbreak of the war in September 1939, Bomber Command had 53 squadrons available, although, like Germany, not all were operational. This would increase to 58 squadrons by 1941, and by March 1943, the total had grown to 62 squadrons. The number of aircraft available at the start of the war was a mere 300. This was clearly not enough for Bomber Command to prosecute an effective bombing campaign. Although the numbers available did increase, it was not until the advent of the heavy four-engine bombers that the effective campaigns could begin. By the spring of 1943, Bomber Command had more than 3,000 planes at its disposal, and the number would increase to nearly 7,000 by the end of the war. It would have the use of over 100 separate airfields, positioned mainly on the east coast of England and in the Midlands. Bomber Command saw several changes in leadership during its long campaign over Hitler's Reich. Men such as Edgar Ludlow Hewitt and Richard Pearce would be at its head during some very difficult periods for Britain. Charles Portal would also be in command for a brief time before moving into the higher echelons of strategic planning. It was Arthur Harris who commanded for the longest and probably most crucial period during the war. These men would help to shape the operational effectiveness of Bomber Command, transforming it from a small, ineffective group into a highly organized and focused killing machine. There is no doubt that Bomber Command, along with its American allies, played a significant part in the eventual downfall of Nazi Germany. America's contribution to the Allied bombing offensive started with the formation of the 8th Air Force in England during 1942. The seeds of the mighty 8th, as it became known, were actually sown in the year before. America was already assisting Britain in her war efforts from mid-1941, with military advisors stationed in the UK. The first American commanders arrived at RAF HQ in Britain at the start of 1942. By the middle of the year, the establishment of the new 8th Air Force was complete, with General Karl Spaatz at its head. The 8th was originally formed with the intention of supporting the operations in North Africa, but this plan was scrapped, and the 8th was moved to mainland European operations, where their B-17s and B-24s were seen as central to the attempt to take the war to the enemy. To achieve this fully, however, the 8th Air Force had to bring itself up to strength. An essential part of the plan was the construction of airfields in England. The location chosen for these bases was mainly in East Anglia, northeast of London.